So I'm here with Timothy Brainard, and he is the developer of the body keys, which is something that comes from the School of Human Design. And I just came across you quite recently, Timothy, and was really taken with your passion for what you're doing and the sense of purpose I feel in what you're doing. And it's also something I'd looked at with other human design teachers, and kind of never really quite got. It seems like quite a quirky end of human design, and you seem to have really kind of dived into it deep. And so I would love to hear about that. And maybe we could start with your expression of what human design shows people. Like,
I love that. I didn't mean to cut you off. I was just so excited by what you said.
Run with it.
Okay. Yeah, I would love to speak to that. I've always been a nerd for systems, in particular systems that lead to any version of self-understanding. And so through the course of time, and specifically throughout my adult life, I've studied a lot of psychological profiling systems, a lot of spiritual systems. And what I've found is that many of these systems really focus on categorization, helping us to understand ourselves in relation to others, and basically applying labels to these different categories or expressions of psychology or spirituality, whatever it may be. What truly fascinated me about human design, and what continues to just thrill me to this day, is the level of individuality that becomes apparent within the context of this system. This is not a categorical system at all. This isn't about applying labels, although a lot of people will speak to certain labels and begin to identify with certain of these ideas that come up in human design. Ultimately, the human design system is known as the science of differentiation. It's all about understanding the precision of uniqueness, the precise and unprecedented perfection of what it means to be yourself. And to me, that is the most ultimate expression of this aim to understand oneself that could possibly exist. And so there was an immediate resonance to human design, and that's how I understand it. My experience of human design is as a lens that allows us to peer into the very core of who each of us is, not as a subset of some group, but as an individual. So there's my response to that.
Beautiful. Yeah. That's interesting. The two ways I explain it, just out of interest, is I always say it's it's the most modern. I call it the most modern application of astrology, and then the gene keys even more modern than that, like really relevant to our times. And then, but with human design, I always think of it as our electrical circuitry. And so what happens when my electricity and your electricity come together, then all these extra lights can go on because of, so that's what I loved about it versus astrology, which I always found really useful but hard to get into unless you're an expert. But the electrical, like when I understood my human design, I was like, oh my God, that's my circuitry. That's what people plug into when they're around me. That's the energy. That's what I always loved about it.
That's right. I love that as well. And it's I think it's a fair way to understand what's happening here, because on a technical level, when we kind of like get down to nuts and bolts here, human design is about the mechanics of what it means to be an individual. So this is about, I like to read like the energetics of who we are as human beings. And so you say electrical, you could say electromagnetic, you could say energetic. But essentially what excites me about it is that it is not theoretical. It is not, it's not even spiritual. It's very functional. It's very down to earth. And when we can understand it from this perspective, it allows us to get a really good sense for not only how we're built, which still has kind of conceptual energy around it, but ultimately how we can use that information to navigate our own experience in a real way, in real life. So that's what excites me is the embodied practicality of what we find through the information that becomes available within this context.
Yeah, I love that. It is super practical. So tell us a little bit about how you came to it and just your own personal journey with it and how it's woken up in you.
Okay, thank you. I would love to. This is fun, by the way, Rowan, and I want to thank you for this opportunity to share any part of my story, because I've always been kind of quiet about my own story. I don't know why that is exactly. I think it just needed the right opportunity to be spoken.
Great. Well, I was curious the moment I found you, so I'm thrilled to be receiving your story.
Okay. Well, you may not be the only one, so hopefully this serves others as well.
Absolutely.
So I'm not good with exact timelines, by the way, but I can tell you it's been a little over 8 years since I first met human design. And at the time I was studying the Myers-Briggs profiling system, and I had recently learned, probably within 6 months to a year, that I was an INFJ. And to me, that was the most exciting thing in the world, to learn about myself through that lens. And I was nerding out about it with a friend of mine who I was visiting in Sedona, Arizona. And she very excitedly introduced me to this book she had just gotten. And it's, the main book for human design. I'm flipping through it and I'm going, oh, snap. This looks in depth. I mean, I just even just the cover of the book spoke to me. Have you had that experience where there's immediate resonance and you can't yet understand why, but there it is?
Yeah.
That was my experience of this book. And of course, I had to learn about my design. And so right then and there, we went online and plugged in the information that I had. At the time, I didn't have a good birth date. I was texting my mom, and I think she picked up immediately that I was asking for reasons that maybe didn't perfectly align with her worldview. So she was very stubborn about giving up any information.
That's great.
I could feel her from across the United States. I could feel her thinking, he's into astrology or something, And so, I begged it out of her, and I got my birth date, an estimation of my birthday, and I learned right then and there, after a few hours of struggle, that I was a projector. I learned two things. I had this visual imprint of my human design. I learned that I was a projector type, which I didn't understand. I didn't know what that meant. I just saw it, and again, immediate resonance, like, oh, of course I'm a projector.
Yeah.
I didn't even know what it meant. And the profile was another piece that immediately connected for me. I learned that I was a 2-5, or a hermit heretic. And just those two words side by side, hermit heretic, I was like, how'd they know?
Yeah.
And so there was this immediate resonance with the system. And from that point forward, of course, I had to purchase my own copy of this book, and I just dove into it. And my experience of human design over the course of these years since has been rather fascinating, because I've been kind of, how am I trying to say this? I've jumped in and out of it. What happens is I'll dive deep and get overwhelmed.
Right.
This is what happened
There's
initially.
so much.
There's so much. And at first I think it's too much, if you're not kind of taking it in moderation, which I was not, you get overwhelmed. There's too much technical information here. And so that's what happened to me. I learned about my type, my strategy, and my authority. I learned about my profile, but ultimately I became overwhelmed by the book and I put it aside. But I remembered these catchphrases. I remembered how my strategy was to wait for the invitation, and I began to test this out. And so even during these long stretches, in some cases of many years where I wasn't studying human design, I was very realistically applying it. I was in the experiment,
Yeah.
And so every few months, every couple of years, human design would reintroduce itself, and I'd dive back in, overwhelm myself, and retreat. So there was this kind of almost musical interaction, right? With like these pulses of interaction. And about 4 years ago, nearly 5 now, I guess, I decided that there was something here that I needed to really dedicate my attention to. And so I began to study it more seriously. And then perhaps 3 years ago now, I actually decided to turn everything else in my life off. I quit my job, which at the time I had just opened a business of my own. I closed it, and I dedicated my full-time attention to studying human design, still applying it, but now digging deeper into these layers that exist beneath the surface of the imprint that we see.
Right.
And so my experience with human design has been that ever since. Full-time student of human design, and then within the past 2 years or so, I began to offer readings, which I refer to as mirror sessions. And of course, that has only served to deepen my understanding and widen my experience of these beautifully expressive designs. And so I remain just totally thrilled by the system to this day.
I would imagine when you're doing those readings that you learn more every time you do one. Is that true?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
And I think that would be true for everyone to a certain extent, but it's particularly true of me as a projector, because projectors have this unique quality in that they learn from the outside in. And so my learning process will necessarily include the other. And as I learn about you, Rowan, and we dive deep into your design, I'm making connections to my own. And so this is how we get to learn in an interactive manner. It's different for different types, but that has always worked really well for me.
Yeah, that's amazing. And at what point in this did you start going more into the health aspects, and did you have health issues that made you go into the health aspects?
Oh man, I feel so much excitement with that question. I can hardly breathe. This is a question that needs to be answered. I mean, I can't even begin to express how primary this was to my experience. Yes, there were health issues. Yes, I have been dedicated to understanding myself in relation to those health issues. And it wasn't until about 3 years ago that I even knew that this was in any way addressed by human design. So I had all this background.
Not many people know. It's the kind of the quiet side of human design,
Yeah.
even now.
Oh yeah. It's very specialized, quite niche, and the information is basically impossible to get a hold of. So I'll come back to that in a moment.
Okay.
I'd love to share a little bit about my past in relation to health, because I think it really serves to ground this whole course of inquiry, especially in terms of how I come at it.
Right.
So I've dealt with chronic discomfort my entire adult life. It started perhaps when I was 16, 17 years old. And for me, this was expressed in my digestion. So I always felt sick to my stomach. And there were variations on how that expressed itself. Sometimes it was bloating. Sometimes it was just this dull discomfort that was just always there. Sometimes it was really sharp pain, but always uncomfortable inside. And so as a result of this, and also as a result of wanting to be strong and have a six-pack ab, I wanted six-pack abs. That's what I wanted. So between wanting to feel better and wanting to look cut, I was always focused on health. And initially, my attention was focused in exercise and physical regimens. And from there, it opened up into food and energy. And I was studying energy medicine. I studied Oriental medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, was dead set on going to school for Ayurvedic medicine, even I enrolled for classes, but wasn't allowed to go because of the job that I was working at the time. I would have had to quit my job in order to go, and I couldn't afford to. So that was a real bummer. But ultimately, I just self-studied, as I always have. And I followed all these avenues to understand my body and to ultimately to understand what was happening in it. I took a few courses in kinesiology. I found that fascinating. Multiple avenues, and none of them really served to answer the question, so to speak. I even went to see doctors to understand why I was sick all the time. And I received a lot of the same diagnoses that you kind of expect in these cases. I was told, well, I probably have leaky gut, which is basically what they say when they don't know what's happening. I was told that it was due to stress, which is another thing that they tell you when they don't know what is happening, although that was probably also true. the point is, no one could pinpoint what was happening inside of me. And so I knew that it was my responsibility to find out. From that point, I started a deep dive into diet, nutrition, supplementation. To this day, I really wish I had thought to get these up so I could like share the screen and show you. To this day, I still have spreadsheets where I recorded and journaled all of my notes and observations across the course of many years between different forms of diet. I've been vegetarian, I've been vegan, I've been juice only, raw only, whole foods. And I'm not talking about like for a few days, you know,
Yeah, like
when I was, oh, absolutely. I mean, it was 6 months as juice only. I juiced multiple times per day, and it's all I ate was juice. And so when I dedicated myself to a course of inquiry, I was fully committed to it. And I followed these themes through for months at a stretch in order to identify truly what was happening under the surface. And though there were some nominal gains, ultimately I was never able to heal that discomfort, which was very, very frustrating to me, because you're years into this, you know, a lot of expense was, you know, wrapped up in this when you're talking about like high quality superfoods and organic only. And I mean, there was just a lot of me invested in
and you've
this.
done everything right and it's still not changing. It's like,
That's right.
yeah,
That's right. Everything I was told to do, you know, the closest I ever got to like true success was a nutritarian diet. I really, to this day, I have a lot of respect for this idea of the nutritarian diet, which is focused on nutritional density instead of caloric content. There's something really special to that.
yeah,
And yet I was still uncomfortable. In fact, as I was doing all the things that I was told to do to clean out my digestive tract, I was feeling worse. And I remember distinctly there was this period of time where I was doing smoothies only. I had actually migrated from juices to smoothies at this point because I thought maybe I was lacking fiber, you know? And so I was doing smoothies. And I mean, these had to be the most expensive smoothies in the world, you know, because every last ingredient, oh my gosh, every last ingredient was carefully sourced. I had personal connections with all of the brands. You know, I knew where they were sourcing this stuff from. I knew the quality that I was in, but I mean, every single smoothie I drank had to have cost me like $30, you know, just in the ingredients.
I finally met someone worse than me. I love it.
Oh man. I distinctly remember drinking this smoothie and thinking, this is the most powerful smoothie in the world. You know, it's got the most dense nutritional content of any smoothie ever invented. And I felt sick. And I told myself, it must be the price you pay for cleaning from the inside out. You know, that's gotta be it. But after months of that discomfort without any relief, it became clear that something else was happening, and that in fact, this experiment had run its course and had yet again failed.
Yeah.
So I essentially gave up for a period of time. I was just resigned to feeling sick all the time, until I learned about the primary health system, which is this specialized application of human design. It's an advanced application of human design that depends upon a very accurate time of birth, but ultimately helps us to understand the individual digestive process. Now, this was brand new to me. And I remember hearing about it for the first time. There was like a 10 or 15 minute video of the founder of human design describing the potential here within primary health system, and instant recognition. I was like, this is it. I need to learn about this. And so I sought to, and for a period of several weeks, I was hunting. I mean, scouring the internet for anything I could find on this topic, and it was just crickets. I mean, you couldn't find any information. Finally, I found my way to a certification course, which was available through the International School of Human Design, except that course was also kind of impossible to get at. You needed years worth of prerequisites before you could even qualify to purchase the 3-year certification course that would allow you to understand your digestive process, which was maddening to me, you know? So then I started on a hunt for someone who could read my digestive process. And I did, in fact, finally find someone. And it did blow my mind, except it was so technically complex that I left the conversation with my head spinning and really struggling to understand how in the world to apply this whole new range of information that I had just been like given.
Yeah.
It really felt like there was this like a Jenga puzzle like dropped in my lap, and it was like, here's something very important for you. Good luck.
Yeah.
You know. So it led me into the course of study, which has consumed me for the past nearly 3 years now. This is really what reawakened my deep interest in human design, because I could see how this was penetrating so far beneath the surface of decision making to understand the very structure of how each of us as individuals relates not only to food, but to life itself. Boom, blew my mind. And I've been just like continually engaged in that study ever since.
Wow. So tell us about how that changed your personal health and what you had to implement for that change.
Okay, the good part. So once I had all the information in front of me and I was able to sort out kind of what my responsibility was in terms of applying that information, I built a plan. Now, my plan was to run a 1 week long experiment, given the information that I had. Now, I need to back up one step, and I'll share a part of what this experiment included for me. I had learned that my digestive process was a very primitive type of digestive process, that my body, in order to effectively metabolize something, really needed for that something to be simple. So simple, in fact, that I was designed to take in one single ingredient at a time. Now, when I learned about this, I had gotten a sense for the different options. And I remember before I ever had my reading, I remember thinking, any of those are fine except for that one about one ingredient at a time, because I'm a foodie. I always have been. I love food. I'm a total fiend for it. I'm a connoisseur in every direction. And I'm just like, that would be the worst, you know? Sure enough.
Typical.
Sure enough. Oh, it is typical, actually. I've since learned that that's a phenomenon known as transference. Basically, we find ourselves on the clear opposite end of what is technically appropriate for us, which is rather interesting to see how conditioning pulls us to the ultimate like polarity of our being. So anyway, I learned that I was this type, and I had to spend a period of a few days. And this is not an exaggeration. I'm not trying to be cute here, but I was in grieving for a few days because it felt as though I had just been diagnosed with a severe case of something. I have to give up eating. It felt like I had to give up enjoying food.
Yeah.
You know, so here I was going to go from being the foodie, like the guy who was, I literally used to I was like a full-time reviewer. I would go around and I would experience these different places and these different foods and coffee, and then I would review the place. I was here in America. We have an application called Yelp.
Yeah.
And at the time, I was reviewing so frequently that I was actually invited to be in the elite Yelp community, which is invitation only, like super undercover. I mean, I was like in this kind of stuff, and here I was like just going to release it all because my design said so. It was like, right. So I decided I'm doing this thing. I at least need to see if there's any relevance to this. I've tested everything else that I can possibly think to test. I've been to the doctors. I felt as though this was like the final recourse. You know, like this is either going to work or it'll be the straw that breaks the camel's back, you know? Yeah. So I built a plan to experiment for 1 week, and my intention was to follow the protocol to a T without a single lapse for 1 week and just see what happened, you know? Now, this was fascinating. Within my first meal, I felt something different. I did not expect to, by the way. This is not like, this was not one of those things. I was so jaded by my previous experiments up to this point that I really didn't expect this one to work.
Yeah.
So it's not like I was looking for something to happen and then it did. I was kind of, well, frankly, I was very critical of the whole thing. I wanted to be optimistic, but I didn't have all that much reason to be. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so my first meal, which was really challenging for me to even assemble a meal where I'm only eating one ingredient at a time in a consecutive. So
what was that first meal?
Good question. I think it was 2 oranges. I'm thinking back now. I had 2 oranges, one after another. I had like a handful of almonds, a handful of cashews, and apple juice. I mean, I think it was
Really
super
simple.
basic.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was the best I could do at the time,
Yeah.
Um, and even it was pretty tough. I mean, to find almonds that hadn't been salted or like
Yeah.
treated in some way, it was kind of a same with cashews. So I had this like little collection of foods that I thought I might like, and I ate them. And I ate them like while grumbling, like a begrudging, like, here we go. But at the end of this meal, I felt something strange. I felt clearer inside my head. And this I had never felt before. They talk about brain fog lifting and they talk about cognitive function. I had never felt like I never physically felt that difference. But ultimately, I felt like lighter inside, but specifically lighter in my head. And I felt like I could think clearer. And I ate that whole meal. I ate enough food in that meal to feel satisfied. And I wasn't tired. I was very used to feeling tired after a meal. My
Right.
body was used to shutting down, and I actually felt kind of enlivened. So that was like, oh, wow, that's interesting. So that was the first meal. Now, within the first week, things really, really began to shift. Things shifted enough within that first period of 1 week that I continued the experiment for another 2 weeks. The first experiment ran for a total of 3 weeks. Within the first 2 to 3 days, my digestive and eliminative processes regulated to perfection, to a place where I had never experienced them before. And this was just within a couple of days. It was as though my body was saying, oh, thank you.
Yeah.
And because I think my case was kind of special because the dietary regimen was so out of the ordinary that I had really never experienced anything like it. So my body had an opportunity to respond to something it had never experienced before. The only exception I can think of was one time years prior where I had run a papaya fast, and I only ate papaya for a period of 1 week. And so that, and I felt wonderful, by the way, during that fast. But aside from that single instance, I had never before eaten food this way, and my body instantly responded. There were certain things I had learned to watch for. I'm going to share something with you here that that is funny to speak about, but important, I believe. There was a period of time during my studying digestion that necessarily had to study the eliminative process, and there was a period of time during which my shelf was full of books on waste.
Right.
It was a rather goofy looking assembly of books, and I learned over the course of that time to pay attention to everything from color to texture to whether or not it floated, to consistency, all of these different details. And there are doctors dedicated, or were, to like reading this in order to understand internal health. And so I had essentially gained that same capacity. And over the course of the first 2 to 3 days of my diet, I instantly noticed a change here. And it was a change I had never before experienced in my life.
Wow.
Here's another fun little fact for you. There are a few things connected to my last name, Brainerd. One of them is one that is historically true and yet also rather hilarious. There's a phenomenon known as Brainerd diarrhea. It's a real thing. And I had always, up till then, experienced this like inside out discomfort, and it had always expressed in this way. And here during the course of my little experiment, everything shifted instantly. And it was a dramatic shift. And I went from being in the bathroom for 15 to 20 minutes at a time. I used to refer to it as my office because I would literally take a book in and just plan to spend the day,
Right.
To in and out in 2 to 3 minutes. I mean, it was clear. It was very clear to me that my insides had just reoriented themselves. It wasn't this long detoxification process that I had come to expect through my studies. It was an instant reorientation of function.
Wow.
This was new to me. After the first week, this was also new to me. My face structure began to change. You can still see this to this day. You haven't seen me before all of this, but my facial features kind of became more cut and more defined. My body changed. Chills as I'm saying this, because there's a deep responsibility to sharing this kind of a story. I don't want anyone listening to think that if they apply their regimen, the same thing will happen to them. There was no part of me that went into this thinking that I would lose weight, see my abs, fix my internal process. It was an experiment. I didn't know what to expect.
Yeah.
But in my experiment, these are some of the things that shifted. My physical body began to change shape and form. About a year and a half prior to this experiment, I had worked really, really hard on muscle. In fact, I was focused on like primitive movements. There's a system known as Animal Flow. There's another amazing trainer named Ido Portal, and he basically trains holistic use of the body. And so I was very, very heavily involved in some of these like really great ways to build muscle. And then I overdid it. This was about a year and a half prior to my experiment. I overdid it, exhausted myself, kind of hurt myself a little bit, and gave up entirely on exercise. So leading up to the experiment, completely lethargic in terms of like physical exercise. And yet within the first week, this is still such a remarkable thing to me, but my body toned up. I wasn't exercising. I hadn't exercised for a year and a half prior, and my body toned up. I started to see my muscles popping. I saw my abs for the first time in my life. And this is coming from a guy who worked for so long with the protein powders and the trainers. I mean, I went at one period, I went from 130 pounds to 170 pounds in muscle weight, and I still couldn't see my abs. And here I am, not exercising, eating this way, and boom, my body changes shape. And for the first time in my life, I get a glimpse, okay? I get a glimpse of my ideal body. It wasn't a conceptually ideal body. It was my ideal body. And somehow, like a sculpture, it just emerged.
It's like
and all I was doing. Yes, like I think it was Michelangelo who used to sculpt that way, and he would So that's my story. It's a story that I've not told, precisely because this area is so vulnerable to expectation and to outside in approach. And I do not want people coming at this from the place of, I want to lose weight, I want to look sexier, I want. If it's not an inside out experiment, if it's not engaged with this playful curiosity of the child, I think we do ourselves a disservice, and we impose yet another
rigid system.
Oh, yes. And the body feels that difference.
Yeah.
You know, these impository methods of fixing and transforming, you know, there's something inside that just kind of goes, oh, not again, you know? Yeah. But something about how I applied this, it allowed for the transformation to occur in its own way and timing. And amazingly, after years and years and years of attempting to impose it in all the best ways I knew how, here in just a matter of days, with something completely different, the shift occurred. So that was my experience of it. And as a result of that experience, I'm just utterly and completely dedicated to this. I believe it is the single most important health system available to the modern human. I sincerely do. That isn't to negate the value or the quality of other systems, but it is to say that what's happening here is foundational, and that all of the things I studied prior really didn't have a place to live until I established this foundation for myself. Now, all the things that I learned about whole foods and the nutritarian diet and all these different things, I could plug into the framework that my dietary regimen had set. And as a result, I'm a totally different person now than I ever was. So I'll pause there. There's one more piece of the experiment that I want to share with you, but I would just want to check in and make sure I'm not, monologuing right past, past the question.
It's a perfect monologue. I want to hear the one last piece.
Okay, one last piece. Ran the experiment for 3 weeks, and then I shifted the experiment. In order to understand something like this, we need a period of contrast. I had all those years of feeling uncomfortable, and then I had this window of perfection.
Right.
Totally changed me, totally blew my mind. But I still needed to see what I had truly gained from this. What would happen if I stopped eating that way? Would I notice a difference in that other direction? Would I start to become sick again, or was I totally healed? How did this play out? And what was the term length, So after 3 weeks, I decided to kill the first experiment and to start a new one. And the new one was to eat crappy again and see what happened. And it was intentional, by the way. It wasn't that I had fatigued, although it was really challenging to eat this way. And I did need a break.
Yeah.
But ultimately, this was a new experiment for me. So I broke my fast with Chinese food. And my first meal was General Tso's chicken. Yeah. So that hit like a ton of bricks. Now, amazingly, I knew before that first bite of General Tso's had met my lips, I knew that my body was saying, I could feel it. And I took that first bite, and two things happened. One, my palate said, ooh, yum, because it had been so long since I had eaten, junk food. Plus I love Chinese food. So it was like, oh yeah, that's what was happening in my mouth. But remarkably, what was happening in my body was something completely different. And I felt, this is, again, a very remarkable thing. It's a phenomenon that prior to running this experiment, I had never felt before, and ever since have felt every single day. I felt something back here. Technically, what's happening when we feed ourselves appropriately is that we're not feeding the stomach so much as we are feeding the brain stem. We're feeding command center for all body processes. So that's where that cognitive lightness came from in that first meal. It's where that lightness essentially kind of erupted for me. And with this first bite of Chinese food, what I felt, again, totally surprised me, didn't know to look for it, but it happened. I felt as though a fist had come around and squeezed my brainstem like this.
Wow.
I felt constriction in the back, almost near the nape of my neck. And it surprised me. It was very uncomfortable. I clearly understood that my body processes were shutting down in response to this food. There was that discomfort. I felt foggy. My thoughts felt foggy. I don't know how else to say that. It was actually like a physical feeling. And then I was tired, so tired, and I ended up having to take a nap after that meal because everything just went oof, down. Boom. This was all the information I needed. And so ever since then, my experiment has been to more and more sustainably apply what is to me a rather rigid system of eating. That has been a completely different course of inquiry in and of itself because it's hard work. It's hard work to gather those sort of ingredients at a high enough quality without any kind of processing applied. It's hard to find enough foods to keep me interested as someone who loves food. So really in the time since, it's been a matter of understanding how I can apply this in a sustainable manner for myself and where I might be able to find little shortcuts or cheats that work for me. So that's a different discussion altogether, an important one. But for now, this is what that first experiment looked like. And it is how that transformed me.
And that's what made you start looking at it and helping other people to see, like experimenting with other people to see if it had the same kind of effect.
Oh yeah. Once I had recognized its effect for me, it was a period of 6 to 9 months before I ever even considered talking with anyone else about it. This is a very important part of my process, by the way. There are many people who I think get very excited about information like this, gobble it up, and then very quickly feel that they're prepared or qualified to share it with others. That has never been my process. Nor do I believe that that's really an appropriate process for anyone. I think these sort of things need time. I think we need to live inside of them almost like a set of clothes in order to identify whether they're going to be comfortable. It's like when you try on new shoes, they might be the sexiest shoes you've ever seen, but after walking around in them for a while, if they're not super comfortable, you need to move on from those shoes.
Exactly.
Right? Nor can you make recommendations until you've walked in them for long enough to know that they're comfortable, right?
Yeah.
So I needed some time. My process is one that depends upon this reflective term length. And it's usually a period of many, many months or years. In this case, it was 6 to 9 months before I decided to begin talking with this, and I didn't at that time offer it as a service. I was doing these readings for free.
Yeah.
Because I was with, close friends and family, because I was very excited to identify whether this amazing transformation would play out for others in the way that it did for me.
Yes.
And so from that place in time, it became a service offering, really because I was overwhelmed with the level of interest that my little, excited conversations had generated. So since then, I've just been kind of following the flow of that. I remain open to this offer of understanding dietary regimen as a service that I offer, but ultimately, I'm still in this like scientific process of discovery. And so while it is my deep joy and pleasure to share what I've learned with anyone interested, there's also a collaborative element that comes to play here. So anytime that I'm working with any participant of a dietary regimen analysis, we're entering into that together. I'm not there as the teacher. I'm not telling anyone the truth about themselves so much as it is like, let's see what there is to see, and then let's engage this process in real life over time together and swap notes. So that's
like
kind of the
ongoing experiment, basically.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Because there's not that many people that have experimented in depth with it, I think.
There aren't. I think there are becoming, at this point, more and more people who are learning about the information. I think in large part due to the work I've done in the time since meeting it myself. I've made a lot of this information accessible in ways it never has been before, and I intend to continue doing that.
Oh, great.
But unfortunately, what I've found happens with systems like these, especially when they're technical, very logical systems, is that there will be a lot of people who get excited about the information and never take that information into practical application, which is why I sound like a broken record, I imagine, to some people, but ultimately what matters most to me is the embodiment of these ideas. How can we live inside of them, and what happens when we do?
Yeah.
It's a part of the concern that I've had with making the information so accessible, because I do believe that there is a deep personal responsibility that needs to kind of come to bear on this as a course of inquiry. But ultimately, what I've decided is that it's not my responsibility to make sure that everyone is responsible with it. It's my responsibility to share what I know to be of value. And so that's what I'm doing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so I would love to hear just one or two stories of working with other people and other types. So just to go into the types a second, actually. So your type, you can eat one food at a time, but over the course of a meal, you could eat 4 different things, but you'd eat them one at a time. I mean, that's what my son does naturally anyway. but you have to do no spices and everything.
Yes, have to. It's a strong word.
Yeah.
It is kind of, I think, the feeling that most of us bring to this conversation, but ultimately, I'm
glad you picked up on that. It's a yes.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to nitpick at all. It's like
I like it.
it's like a motivational element that I think, especially for modern humans and especially for modern women, has become so ingrained.
Yes.
It's like it's very utilitarian in that regard. But what I see to be most valuable is an open-ended, wonder-filled relational dialogue with the body. This is ultimately what we're engaging in, is a dialogue. So there's no have to, there's no should. We have a basic framework that we get to kind of adapt and explore until we identify what works for each of us individually. So someone else who has my exact same digestive process, first of all, they're going to have countless other variables in their individual design that differ from mine, which contribute to how they experience this. But ultimately, their life is different from mine. So even if we had the exact same design and the exact same digestive process, their end is going to be different from mine, right? So that's why we really can't get lost in the shoulds or have tos. So there's that piece. Now, you wanted, I think, maybe a quick description of each of the different types. Is that what you were asking for?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay, so we're going to move in a sequence here that begins at what I'm going to refer to as the bottom, which is the most primitive form of relating to food and information, and that's mine. And we're going to move up to the most sophisticated. So it's almost going to feel a bit like an evolutionary process.
How many are there?
There are a total of 6 primary types, and each of those 6 types has 2 possible expressions known as binaries. And so there are technically a total of 12 different processes, but 6 primary layers that we'll address.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So this first layer, this is my type, and this is a digestive process that is very primitive and very simple, and it can only really make sense of one ingredient at a time. And so when you put a berry or a tomato in your mouth, the body says, oh, a berry, or oh, a tomato. It knows what it is. It knows how to make use of what it's eating. And so metabolically, there's this optimal flow that can occur. And every possible nutritional element of that particular food will be made use of. That's kind of the promise here. If, however, someone like myself were to eat soup or some kind of a blended food, the body doesn't know what it's dealing with, so it eliminates that food as waste. It's not capable of making effective metabolic use of that food. It can't gather the nutrients.
Smiling because I'm thinking of your expensive smoothies.
Yeah. Oh, right. Right.
Just straight out.
Oh, yeah. I know. Believe me, I thought that, like, oh, how much money did I,
put down the toilet.
Oh, literally put down the toilet. Yes, that's exactly right. So, so that's fascinating. It's not a way that we're used to thinking about food. So that's the first layer, one ingredient at a time. Now, the next layer is known as a gatherer type. The first layer is known as a hunter type, and you can kind of get the sense for someone who goes out, gets the deer, comes back, eats the deer.
Yeah.
Right. Very straightforward. The gatherer type has quite a bit more flexibility in terms of what its body can make sense of, but still, it's not designed to take in a wide range of different foods. And if you think from an evolutionary perspective of the gatherer within some of these indigenous or even Neanderthal societies, they would have a very specific set of foods that they could travel to and forage and bring back to the village. Now, what's interesting about this second type is that it's extremely picky. It knows precisely what it can eat and what it can't eat. And so there's a phenomenon here that I like to refer to as the desert island foods. The gatherer will always know those few foods that it would want with him or her on a desert island. I could eat this thing every day from now on into forever because it works. Yeah. Right. So there's a discriminatory value that plays out here. Though technically that body can eat blended foods and mine cannot, that body will not eat a wide range of foods because only very specific foods will be perfectly aligned to that body's metabolic process. And it's the responsibility of the person with that digestive process to go out and find what those foods are. Right. That body will also be extremely critical of quality. So the difference between, a head of lettuce that is like a GMO head of lettuce and an organic head of lettuce would be noted. Yeah. The difference between an organic head of lettuce that came from some farm in Mexico and an organic head of lettuce that came from the farm down the street, that would be noted as well. Right. So there's this quality of refinement. It's kind of like the closing down process. You might end up starting at this, like, I could eat anything in the world, but over time it narrows and narrows and narrows until you're eating these foods because you know that they treat your body well. Right. So that's also a very different way of thinking about food. It's like an elimination diet, but backwards. Yeah. It's rather interesting. So the next type deals with temperature. And this is known as a transformer type. And these people are either going to be designed in a way that requires that their body take in hot food and drinks or cold food and drinks. And this will be dependent upon whether their digestive process runs hot or cold. For instance, if you have digestive process that runs cold. By eating hot foods and drinking hot drinks, you're introducing heat into the system, and this is energy. So it basically stimulates the metabolic process and allows the digestion to operate.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
So you're literally on this level using energy, the energy of temperature and heat, to regulate the digestive process and allow for effective metabolism. It's truly fascinating. And these types, there are two of these 6 types that are just like tend to be profoundly affected by nailing their dietary regimen. The first is mine. The body literally changes.
Yeah, I mean, it makes so much sense because it's so specific. Yeah.
Yes. And the second is this transformer type. This is why they're called transformers. These people, when they're eating in the way that their body needs to be nourished, they're going to show vitality. They're going to be fit. They're going to have very clearly healthy bodies. And when they're off that tightrope, so to speak, they'll put on weight. They'll feel uncomfortable. Their bodies are like balloons. They are either like putting on weight or losing weight, and it happens fast, sometimes in a matter of days. That's why they're called the transformer type. It's interesting to me, by the way, that this type of all the types is the one that I always feel most excited to talk with, because I feel like theirs is so easy to apply and so quick to see the gains. Like of all the types, like these should be the ones who like jump right in. And yet of all the types, these are the ones that I've found to be most reluctant. There's something like, oh, you're supposed to eat hot foods and drink hot liquids. Oh man, but I always prefer my cold smoothies, and I really prefer, like, just run the experiment for a minute. Like, you're going to be amazed. Like, I don't really want to, but this is, this is, you're either fully committed to this or you're not. And if you're not, that's okay. But ultimately you're not going to see the results. But if you are, I just feel so strongly that anyone truly dedicated to application and exploration of this material will have their lives transformed from the inside out, not conceptually, but physically.
Right.
Yeah. So, okay. So those are the first 3 layers. The 4th layer, this is an interesting one. This is known as the determiner body, and it basically deals with the energetic quality of the space around it. So here's a rather great leap in terms of the sensitivity of the digestive process. The first 3 we looked at were very internal. They were about a single ingredient, or they were about being really discriminating about what you eat, or about the temperature of what you're taking in. But somehow now, the digestive system is reaching out to experience the world outside the body, and the quality of the space around it is affecting or stimulating or depleting that process. And that's remarkable to me. It's a rather large leap. And so these people will respond to an environment that is nervous and stimulated and active, or very calm. And there are some people who need the space around them to be just calm and quiet. And there are people who need the space around them to have this kind of stimulating energy.
They need to be watching the news, or in a restaurant, or something has to be happening other than the food.
Having a conversation, anything at all to kind of like goose the system. The image of the person who's like that is often like the cat playing with the mouse before it actually eats it. It's not torturing the mouse. It's revving up its metabolic process. So by the time it eats the mouse, it can digest and benefit from the nourishment of that food.
Right.
These people are the same way if what they need is kind of a nervous setting, right? But here still, the energetic quality of the space around is what stimulates the digestive process. And that's fascinating. Again, it's something we're not used to paying any amount of attention to.
Yeah.
So that's the 4th level. The 5th level is also focused on the energetic quality of the space around, except in this case, it's focused in particular on acoustic frequency. So this is a sound body. It's the listener body, and it's focused on whether the space around it has a high degree of sound, high frequency sound, noise, or low sound, low frequency sound, quieter sounds, or in many cases, no sound. Some people actually need to eat with like earplugs, and they need to have this quiet, quiet, quiet acoustic experience in order for their body to kind of like come down enough to make use of that food. So you start to see how these binaries, these different polar expressions, they are really heavily weighted to one side or another, hot versus cold,
Right.
Nervous versus calm, loud versus quiet, right? Fascinating though, that the quality of the acoustic setting could affect the body's ability to effectively metabolize nutrition.
Yes.
So new,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's no diet in the world that's paying attention to these variables, and here's
Right.
human
Exactly.
design saying,
I mean,
oh,
all diets I always think are problematic because they're always treating everybody as the same, and there's just like that's just wrong
exactly right.
straight out the gate.
There's that categorical um, understanding of humans that really just doesn't serve us as individuals. You know, it might get us close-ish, but ultimately we'll never find the truth within an umbrella category. In human design, this is known as homogenization, making everyone the same thing. Whereas what we're focused on here is a very, very precise way of being who you are.
Yeah.
So you're right. And you can think about, you know, here on the sound level, the listener body, you might have one listener body with high sound and another listener body with high sound. Both of them need that stimulating acoustic setting, but one of them really likes to be stimulated by city sounds. You know, that person fits beautifully in the heart of San Francisco. You know, they're sitting in a coffee shop and there's the clink and the clatter and the meetings and the conversation, and their body's like, yummy.
Yeah.
And that next person could not stand to eat in that environment, and their high sound is sitting in the middle of the woods with the chattering of squirrels and bird song and a thunderstorm rolling in, and right. So they have the same digestive process, but their way of identifying that center of their body's effective function will be completely different.
Amazing.
Isn't it? I mean, just so exciting. So even with the level of precision that I can bring forward in an analysis, ultimately understanding what that information will mean for you as an individual is going to be something that no one outside of you could ever find for you, not even someone as brilliant as me.
Not even a Brainard.
That's right, not even a Brainard. Okay, so the sixth level and the final level, the most sophisticated, the most sensitive, and admittedly the most dependent upon getting this right. You know, this body is so sensitive that it's basically shut down when it's not effectively nourished. And when it is effectively nourished, it has this level of vitality that kind of reaches even beyond humanness. There's something very spiritual here, but something that can really only develop or come to life when appropriately nourished. So on this sixth level, you're dealing with a light body. This is known as a watcher, and this person's body is relating specifically to the quality of the light environment. And so these people either have metabolic processes which require direct access to sunlight in order for them to be stimulated and to run optimally. Sunlight, ideally, any light, technically, okay? Right. UV light. And then on the other side of this, you have bodies which are basically overstimulated by direct access to light. And so they need to eat in darkness. It's known as an indirect light body. And so these people tend to eat between the hours of dusk and dawn. They're often referred to as nocturnals. So again, truly unusual. And right? Imagine if you're that type.
Do you find that there is kind of a whole bunch of people that have just worked this out for themselves without knowing what they've worked out, but like they just become a nocturnal, they don't know why?
I have read about that being the case. In studying this information, I read a lot of examples like that. Having at this point posted so many of these analyses, I cannot say that I have ever found that to be the case.
Interesting.
What I have found to be the case, in fact, is that just about everyone finds themselves on the other end of what's appropriate for them, and that identifying what's natural is actually quite a long process of little by little relaxing into this state of remembering how we've always been. But at first, it's completely counterintuitive. Seems to be the case.
That's fascinating. So I would love to hear just one or two stories of other people you've worked with, like, I mean, or even one for each of the types, just what kind of transformations you've seen and how long they've taken, what you've witnessed.
I'm thinking through to see if there's a good example that I can share with you. Between the two of us, I need to say that I haven't seen a level of commitment to this that I would anticipate based on my experience.
Okay.
And I think this is a part of why it's felt so important to share this story.
Right.
Because I think that a lot of people come to this information expecting it to be another diet, and it is not.
Right.
It isn't a diet. Sure, it has the word diet within, what I've chosen to name it, dietary regimen. But ultimately, this is about how our bodies relate to the energies of life around us. And that's information, and it's food and the nutritional information inherent to food and all of these different things. But man, I just haven't really seen the application, the commitment to the application that I would like, except in some very, very special cases. And I don't know that I have ever seen yet a transformation quite as dramatic as my own. That isn't to say that it isn't happening.
Yeah.
And what I shared previously is not to say that so many of the people that I've met along the way aren't applying it just as in just as dedicated a manner as I did. It's just that I don't have the time or opportunity to stay in touch with everyone that I work with.
Of course.
So I don't hear all the stories. There is, something else that plays into this is that we're learning about one aspect of what it means to be like yourself. If you're nailing this side of things, and you're eating perfectly in alignment with how your body is made to eat, but you're compromising yourself in all these other areas, relationally, spiritually, emotionally, your body is still going to express deep patterns of refusal, right? It's going to tell you that you're in the wrong position. So, I was kind of applying many different things at once when I ran mine. And I was over the course of, at that point, 6 years, almost 7 years, I had aligned myself to this like fine thread of what it meant to be myself. And this is a continual process which will go on for the rest of my life. But I had kind of set that foundation for myself before I entered into this experiment. And so I think there was this confluence of events that allowed for this transformation. What I have seen in so many cases is you have someone who is applying all of the details of their dietary regimen, and they're noting like certain benefits, but if they're compromised in other areas, their body is still screaming for recognition. Their body is still saying, please stop compromising me here. Please stop giving all my energy away to this project or to this person or to this location, right? So I really wish I had more like success stories to share with you.
Yeah.
But what we're dealing with here is so complex and so personal that I just don't know. I don't know if we can expect the same kind of success stories that we might expect. Like if I were to write a book on dietary regimen, it wouldn't look like any of these like diet books where you're reading about so-and-so who lost so many pounds in so much time and now their life is beautiful and all these things. This is a deep study. And in my experience, it has required like a gradual, long-term process of continual death and rebirth as we remember slowly but surely what it is to be ourselves. And it isn't just about the dietary regimen. It's about every decision that we make along the way.
Yeah.
And somehow it's served by this foundational process of understanding how our body needs to be nourished. When we can effectively nourish the body, everything else that we are pursuing lightens, right? The load lightens. Unfortunately, I have more examples of people who have heard what they need to do and done the exact opposite, over and over again.
So goodness, maybe we need to go into an experiment. I mean, so you feel like people can really see a big change within 1 week. You feel like that's probably the case, but we don't know for sure.
I do believe that to be the case.
So we should run an experiment where we take one from every type, 12 people, get them to make a week commitment and just track it.
Well, yes, that would work, except again, this can't be imposed from the outside in. You know, I can't,
Want it, you mean?
They have to opt into it.
Yeah, well, that would be easy. Social media, you can just do a
You would
contest.
think so. You would think so. These forms of motivation, they're subtle. You know, for instance, I'm not a fan of challenges. I'm not a fan of contests. These do not sustain.
Yeah.
They're outside-in approaches. Ultimately, there is a very special sort of person, and I've met a lot of them. There's a very special sort of person who is internally motivated to understand themselves and to fall in love with what it means to be a human in their unique body.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
But in the 8 billion people alive, I think that the very, very tiny percentage who exist on that, like, on that path, I think they're rather rare.
Yeah.
Becoming less rare, you know, I think we're waking up and understanding what it means to be ourselves, but still, I think it's a rare subset of humanity that cares enough to dedicate themselves like that.
So, okay, so I have a question now.
Yeah.
So now that you know all this, and that's obviously your kind of your baseline, if someone invites you to dinner or you go to a party, do you just do whatever just because it's the social priority is higher than the dietary priority, or are you quite regimented about it for yourself?
Initially, I was totally regimented about it, especially during my first experiment. In the time since, I've become significantly more flexible, and basically I just understand now that we have two ways of being in this body. One of them will be able to make use of the food that I take in, and one of them simply won't. So in a case where someone invites me out to eat, I'm going to go and I'm going to enjoy every last detail of being with that person, including whatever food we might be eating. And the foodie Tim is going to come out and get all excited about the preparation and the colors and the flavors, and we're going to nerd out over it.
Yeah.
But there's no part of me that's going to think that consuming that food will in any way support my processes or you know, serve the body.
Yeah.
In that case, it's not about the food. It's about the relationship with the other. And we're like celebrating one another over food.
Yeah.
You know, but
yeah,
if in the course of a day, and this is important to me every single day, if in the course of a day I do not take in food in a way that is aligned with my system, then I know that I have basically not eaten on that day.
Right.
I haven't given my body anything that it can make use of. So what tends to be the case for me is that every morning, I live alone, and so every morning I eat I eat my way, and it takes me about an hour to take my time and to move through all these different types of foods and powders and different things that I know work for me every morning. But if by that night I've done really well over the course of the day and I'm just craving pizza, right? I'm going to go and I'm going to enjoy a piece of pizza, but I'm not going to expect that pizza to, like, you know, be of any value to me.
Yeah.
The value will be enjoyment.
It's, I always like kind of liken it to, like, in every situation you have to look at what the highest priority is. And, you know, I'm like you, I've been a serious foodie and I've checked out every, you know, raw, like, veggie, vegan, meat, you know, the whole lot. And I lived in California for years, where it's really easy to do all of that and you have access to all of that, and, you know, everybody else is doing all of that. And then I went to the Middle East, and in the beginning I was like, well, I'm not going to eat the meat because I don't know where it came from. I'm not going to eat this because it's not organic. And then I was just like, there's a higher priority here. I'm here to meet the people. I'm here to be of influence to the people. And all of a sudden I just dropped it all. And in every situation, you know, the Middle Eastern people, they love to feed you. So you go around to their house and they want to eat ice cream. I'm like, I don't eat ice cream. And they're like, no, it's really good ice cream, you know. Okay, you know. And it's interesting because I went from having a super sensitive body to, like, all, you know, to wheat, to sugar, to dairy, to all kinds of things. I kind of fixed it all in my 20s, more or less, you know. It's never total, but just, you know, healed most of my stuff. And now I can do those things. I can eat whatever, but I have my baseline, like you, like I have my good breakfast or my good, stuff at home. And then the social priority becomes my priority, not the ingredients,
Right.
And I think,
But it's intentional.
yeah,
That's I think the beautiful thing about it. You understand yourself enough, and you understand yourself, your there's like your autonomy in this, and so you choose to go this way or that way, and that's an empowered position.
yeah,
It's not an impository thing. It's not a what you should do or shouldn't do. It's a choice, and that
yeah.
choicefulness, I think, is a part of expressing individuality. So I love that. It's a very important point that you've made.
So I have one question left, and then we can just, whatever. So I was hanging out with Richard yesterday, and I told him I was coming to interview you today, and he said, my question is, how does that work in a family? Like, because again, as we were just saying, there's a higher order sometimes, and in
Yes.
a family, the higher order is often the gathering and the sharing. And if like one person's supposed to eat in the dark and one's supposed to eat in the light and the other one's supposed to have cold, and like how do you, how much have you thought about that being a single guy still?
Well, a lot. I've thought about it a lot because just about everyone that I work with is in a position where they're eating with their family. And I often visit my own family. So I also eat with the family, even though I'm, alone
Yeah.
most of the time. I can tell you that there are two sides to this story. Well, I'm sure there are many more than two, but
Yeah.
the human design side would be rather rigid. In fact, the founder, when he spoke to this, he often spoke about the importance of eating alone. It's kind of like the idea of sleeping alone in human design. It's so pivotal to becoming yourself, but ultimately, do any of us want to sleep, separated by a minimum of 15 feet from our partners and our loved ones? No, not everyone's going to want to play that game, right? Same is true here. I actually don't believe that it's necessary to segregate yourself in order to understand any of this. I do believe and understand that when you're dealing with a family dynamic, you're dealing with a bunch of individuals, each of whom is infinitely complex. And as challenging as it is to understand oneself, it's exponentially more challenging to understand oneself in relationship to the others in a family setting. So you've got, 4 people, or in my case, 6, my 6 of us in the family sitting at the table. It's probably impossibly complex to get it right. So we need to take that off the table, this idea of perfection or getting it right or doing it perfectly. And we need to run it as 1, an experiment, and 2, an opportunity to relationally engage. So imagine this. If you have a family and you're all sitting at the table and everyone is opted into this course of inquiry, then what you have is a wonderful opportunity to understand one another and to engage with one another in a way that respects or honors the individual processes at the table. So, when I go home, when I go home to visit my family, I'm typically not eating my way. I'm eating what my mom prepares for food, and I'm enjoying it so much, but I choose, just as you do, to compromise that for that period of time. But if I had an awareness of each of their types, which I do, but they're not in the experiment the same way I am, so it's not a good example. If they were all in the experiment together, then I guarantee you there would be plenty of things that we could do to accommodate each of our needs. That isn't to say that it would be perfect in every case. And sometimes, say you've got someone who needs it to be really, really quiet, right? That person may sometimes choose to leave the table and eat alone because on that day, their body is demanding it. And everyone would be able to honor that because they'd understand, well, on this day, Johnny needs to go and eat in his own room. But there would be an understanding that I think would be allowed to grow up around this shared ritual of eating. And ultimately, to me, this is where the true value of this information comes to bear. And this is why I struggled earlier with your question about like success stories, because to me, I'm not gauging success by weight lost. Certainly not anymore about like whether or not I have abs. Some of these superficial concerns that initially I noted and that I always see coming into play at the outset of this experiment. What I've found is that this whole course of inquiry illuminates the ordinary act of eating. It's about how we feel in the body and how we relate to life as a body. And so the truest benefit for me, and one that I have in fact seen, and this is very important for me to state, one that I have seen as a benefit across the board, is the way that something as mundane as eating becomes elevated by the information that we learn here. So though I can't speak to the success stories that we're used to hearing about, I can tell you that these beautiful individuals that I've had the opportunity to support in this way have left the conversation and have been able to engage with the process of eating in a whole new way. And something that was once kind of meaningless and utilitarian, and in many cases even begrudging, something we needed to do, well, it's time to eat. It has in almost every case been elevated to a place of communion, ritual, gratitude, enjoyment. And there's a level of intention and care brought into a basic act of living that did not previously exist. And so this is, for anyone who may watch this and listen to this, who has worked with me, it's very, very important. Like, my heart is yearning to express that what I said previously about people not being committed enough to see the gains is only in relation to the societal expectation of gains. I do believe that it's possible to achieve those through an aligned diet, but that is not what I'm aiming for, nor is it what I recommend that anyone aims for. Those things happen incidentally. And as far as I'm concerned, it's fun to speak about, I saw abs for the first time and all this stuff, but ultimately, I'll tell you what has been the most profound change for me, and it's meditative. It's a matter of motivation and intention. It's the fact that eating for me, and chills as I say this, because this is the heart of it all. Eating for me is no longer about, it's not meaningless anymore.
Right.
In fact, it is a deeply spiritual experience, and there is so much love and gratitude and wonder and awe at the simple fact of eating a matzah or an apple or drinking some water and recognizing what it's doing for my body. The whole thing is a thrill. There's magic in the mundane, and something about dietary regimen, when it's accessed appropriately, allows for us to tap that magic, not just once or twice, not temporarily, but multiple times every single day for the rest of our lives, and that changes a person. And it may or may not change their weight or the structure of their face, but it absolutely will change their heart. And what it does on that level also changes the quality of their relationships with others, the quality of their relationship to the projects that they commit themselves to. It transforms you from the inside out, and that to me is the ultimate success. And that's one that I could tell you stories about.
Oh, well, those are the kind of stories I mean, just how it's impacted people's lives. Doesn't have to be physical, but what difference it's made to them to know this,
Yeah, okay. See, those are the kind of stories that excite me. And I can tell you, it's tough. I never feel at liberty to share another person's story. So giving specific examples is tough for me. But I can tell you that in the past day alone, I've received 2 emails from people who had recent analyses with me. And both of them are just, lots of exclamation points, let's put it that way. There's an excitement that occurs when you recognize that eating is not just eating, and that something so simple and everyday is in fact a doorway to this deeper spiritual core of our being. And there's something like this. It's like the double doors of our heart open up. The rib cage opens up and we touch life in a whole new way. And so this is what I'm seeing. It also instigates curiosity. That's the other thing that I have seen as a repeated theme. There's something about this that kind of wipes the slate clean, and everything you thought you knew is gone. And you have to engage it with a level of curiosity. And so what I've found to be equally as exciting to me as this bright new potential is the questions. And so I'll get these questions just 2 days ago, I received a long stream of questions from someone who is applying this very, very intentionally, right? And she's talking about sound, and she's all excited about how the different qualities of sound affect her process. And she's, what if I did this, and what if I did that? All things, by the way, that are unique to her experience that I could never have guessed at because I'm not her, Right. And so that's the sort of thing that to me is that's success. We're not aiming at an ultimate thing that we achieve and da-da-da, got it, I succeeded. Success is the process and the quality of intention and awareness that we bring to it.
Yeah.
I know I'm preaching to the choir with you, but yeah.
No, that's beautiful. So it's one of the things I found interesting when you were sharing them all with me is that only 2 of them are really that relative to the food.
That's right.
And the other 4 are much more relative to the experience and the environment.
That's right.
So, I mean, obviously nutrition will always play a key regardless, you know, high quality nutrition, I'm sure, is always going to play a key, but it's interesting that in those other 4, it's almost secondary.
It is secondary. Ra, the founder of Human Design, used to joke that if someone is eating in alignment with their design, they could eat roadkill and effectively metabolize the value of that food.
Well, roadkill is super nutritious, so that's not a good example. Come on, it's a wild animal.
Yeah, right. You know,
they could eat McDonald's and effectively. That would be a better example.
Well, and I think that's essentially what he was saying, but it was a bit of a joke, and what initially I took it very literally, and my experience and my observation has showed me that in fact that isn't the case. You know, it's not that when we do it right we can eat garbage and our body says thank you. When we do it right, we've set a foundation that holds everything else that we've learned about food. That's what I've learned.
Yes.
So
yes, and you expressed that very well earlier.
Okay.
I liked it when you said that. Yeah, because it's cumulative, and you know, I think part of all the testing is you go on these dogmas and you try it completely, you try raw and you try it, because otherwise how do you know? You know. That's
right.
So okay, well I want to do an experiment. I'll do a week.
Okay, why don't I put together, have I sent you a reference document for your type?
No, so I'm the transformer type, and you said I was cold. How accurate are we talking minutes wise? Like within 20 minutes, or because I've asked my mom and she's like, yeah, it was around noon, but like I don't know, you know, my birth date says noon exactly, and that's suspect to me that there's no minutes or no, you know,
your birth certificate actually says noon.
12 noon. And both my parents say noon as well, so like, but I don't know if anyone looked at a watch. You know, they weren't particularly, they were hippies.
So there's a technical answer to this, and there's my personal response. The technical answer is that when we're dealing on this level of the information, it is a matter of minutes that can, you know, make or break something. Like things change quickly on this level, usually within a period of 5 to 15 minutes. And it depends upon where you're at within that gradient. You know, sometimes you're right on the cusp between 2 things. Sometimes you're pretty safe in the middle. But that's the one piece. That's the technical response. Here's what I've found in my experience. First, I've learned to trust what's on the birth certificate as a starting point, okay? So I'll receive that information as the analyst, and I'll run a series of charts within a period of 5 minutes on basically a tolerance on either side. Yeah. So I can get a sense for what, if anything, is changing and when.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll bring that into the conversation if it's relevant. In many cases, it's not. In fact, in most cases, I don't personally believe it to be relevant, so we stay with what we've got. In those cases where it is relevant, I love those cases, because in those cases, even more than most, you have this deep need to experiment. You don't know if you're going to be this thing or this totally different other thing. And so there's only one way to find out. And that's one of the things I love to say.
I like that, because the only thing that made me question it is because when you say cold, as I said, I did do raw for, you know, I don't know, best part of a year probably. And I didn't find it very good for my body. But obviously that's raw and it's cold, but it's also no meat, no, you know, and I have definitely found, I think I shared with you before, I didn't eat meat until I was 26. And when I did, I had a bit of a similar experience to you. I just felt like my body inhaled it. Like there was nothing eliminated. My body just was like, yes, I'll take everything.
Wow.
You know?
Yes.
So, which was a very strange experience to me, because I was a diehard vegetarian for 26 years, you know.
Yes.
So, was quite a leap.
Body knows, and the
Yeah.
body tells us clearly. That's what it is.
So yeah, that just the not doing so well on raw made me question the cold thing. And if I was gonna say which I preferred, I would probably say hot. But
Yeah.
you've said that is usually the case.
It is usually the case, which isn't to say that it's wrong in your case. It's just to say that it's suspect, and in every case, the ideal is to wipe the slate clean and work with what we've got in front of us, and then let the body guide the way from there. Ultimately, the value of this is, it's not about knowing our dietary regimen. It's about using dietary regimen as a means of listening into the body's knowing.
Exactly.
This is it's like a tool. You practice the martial arts, and that's what leads you into the body is movements, or you apply your dietary regimen, and that's what teaches you how to listen into and begin a dialogue with the body. It's the same general thing, where it's a tool in that regard. So here's what I would like to do for you. I'd like to put together a reference document for you, and for anyone listening, this is an available option for everyone on the website. If you don't care to spend the time with me in a complete analysis, or it's too expensive for you, or maybe you've got enough understanding of human design that you don't really need someone to guide you through this, then there's always the option to purchase the reference document itself, which will always be personalized to your design, and that's what I'm going to prepare for you, Rowan. It will incorporate every detail of your design that I have found to be relevant to this conversation. It's built from scratch in every case. It's personalized to every individual. It is of an equal value from my perspective to the full analysis. The only difference being that we don't get the one-on-one.
Right, exactly. That's a great offering for people.
Yeah, so I'm gonna send that your way. But I'm also gonna take a little bit of extra time to run that tolerancing on either side of noon, and I'll let you know what I find.
Yeah, I don't think it would be more than 15 minutes either way, but I do feel like both my husband and I doused it, and I got 11:43 and he got 12:07. So I was like, okay, well, that didn't work.
Let's see. Watch that like period be right there in between those two. I mean, it might could be something
exactly. Yes, that would be fascinating. Yeah.
I'll find out for you, and then I'll send that to you. I think I should be able to get that to you today. And then I would just encourage you to take your time reading through it. This will be a compilation of all my notes on every relevant aspect of your design. They're just bullet pointed notes. So kind of take them in, give yourself a moment to contemplate them. And then when you're ready, let me know. I would love to run the experiment and be a part of how, that goes for you.
I will definitely do it as a proper week-long experiment and take notes and everything. I mean, I'm pretty healthy. Yeah. The one thing I also thought is that my thyroid is low. So I take, it's not bad, I take one pill. And that would put the temperature thing off.
Oh, very interesting, wouldn't it?
Yes, because that is kind of your temperature regulator in the body. So although like usually I might handle very cold food, with the thyroid running under, it would change that scenario. So
that's interesting. And in fact, when we find what works well for your body, you may find that your thyroid in time regulates as well. There's something about this that is deeply physical. And though I'm saying that a lot of the things that excite me about it are kind of more spiritual, and they're relational, ultimately we're grounding the body in its appropriate processes for nourishment. And it just takes a little bit of time to identify what that is. But once we do, the body breathes a sigh of relief, and all of those everyday biological processes, they do come into alignment. That has been my experience. So
that's super cool. And that was kind of when I was chatting with Richard and he gave me that question for you, was we kind of thought of it like, this is kind of like, it's almost what you would want to do on retreat. And then you, as we said, you adjust it for life, you know, but it's like when you want to have that reset and you really want to step into your kind of your core strength, then you would want to run this really solidly. And then when you're good, then you can like float with it a little.
It's so important for there to be space around this.
Yeah.
You and T are 100% correct about that. I didn't know that at first, and there's nothing in the human design material to really account for that. You know, most of what you find in human design is fairly rigid, fairly direct, kind of like hardcore in that
Yes.
way.
Yes.
But you know, my experience of that kind of application is that it will never sustain. And if something is not sustainable in our experience, then we can't benefit from it long term. So for me, the question isn't just how can I apply this, but how can I apply it in a sustainable way that my body can relax into, you know? So you know, the work that I've done has always been built on that premise. There are three core premises for me. One is simplicity, one is practicality, and one is sustainability. You know, if it's not none of those things, then there's still work to be done. Yeah.
Well, I think that is a beautiful space to end this interview in, for people to you know, end on that piece of wisdom, because that really does sum it up beautifully. And it's wonderful to hear your story and your experimentation
So
with
much.
this. And I hope that a lot of people will come in and start experimenting with you, so that we can all, as humanity, start, you know, fine tuning this more and finding out the core gift of the essence of this gift.
Yes. Thank you so much, Rowan.
You're heading.
This conversation has been a gift for me, and I hope it is for our listeners as well.
Me too. Me too. Well, thank you.
You're welcome.